Morning, everyone. I'm John Dunn, and I run Conflict Resolution Limited. I want to start with a question, and I'd like you to think about it honestly, even if you don't share the answer. When was the last time you avoided a difficult conversation at work? Thinking maybe with a colleague, a member of your staff, or a business partner. I imagine that most people can think of one pretty quickly. The key thing, though, is what happened next? Did you have that conversation? In my experience, one of two things typically happen. Either someone else eventually has that conversation for you when the issue hits their desk too, or nobody does. And the problem, rather than go away, quietly develops in the background until suddenly it's not quiet anymore. Workplace conflict is one of those things that rarely resolves itself. It tends to build over time and potentially draw more people into it, or it can go underground. If it goes underground, it's because people are bottling things up. And inevitably, when these things surface, and they will, the cost can be very significant in terms of time, money, people, and in reputation of the business. An interesting fact, I think, is that 1 in 3 UK employees experience conflict in the workplace every year. Now, where do I fit in? Well, what I do is help those situations, help businesses through them, through mediation and workplace investigations. I help organizations deal with those situations properly, early if possible. Early is always best, but always with complete impartiality. I'll probably tell you a little bit about my background before I go any further. I spent 25 years as an investigator, formal investigations for HMRC, the Gambling Commission, the British Horse Racing Authority, and latterly National Grid. It was work where I learned that getting the details or the process wrong could have very real and painful consequences. Work where objectivity was essential. And during that time, I saw organizations handle difficult situations well, and a fair number of them handle it very badly. And I noticed something. The ones that struggled almost always had one thing in common. They avoided the issue for too long or jumped straight into it without a proper plan or the proper resources. Too often, the action taken wasn't intended to get to the bottom of the issue, but focused more on making it go away as quickly as possible. One definition of an investigation that I learned very early in my career sounds very simplistic, but it's a phrase I've used over and over again over the years, and that is that an investigation is a search for the truth. You wouldn't always know that from the approach I've seen taken over the years. Now, as well as investigations, I'm also a trained mediator. And in July last year, I launched Conflict Resolution Limited and put the two together. I work independently, which suits the nature of the work. When organizations need someone external they can trust to handle sensitive matters properly, that independence is key. Okay, so what's it all about? Let me give you some context for why this matters, because if you're not in HR or working in employment law, workplace conflicts might not necessarily be your problem, it might feel like someone else's. So as you can see from the slides, ACAS estimates that workplace conflict costs UK employers around 28 billion pounds a year. Now, I thought that was a typo when I read it for the first time, but it's not. 28 billion. That comes from lost productivity, sickness absence, staff turnover, and tribunal costs. That may not relate particularly well, given the scale of it. There are very few businesses out there that are going to be thinking that, oh, well, this is about us. The number I think lands harder is that the average cost of replacing a single employee in the UK is around £30,000. Every business can relate to that. And that's before you factor in the time it takes to recruit a replacement and how long it takes them to get up to speed, which, as you can see, is approximately 28 weeks, over half a year. And for senior and specialist roles, the total can reach six figures. A significant proportion of those departures are conflict related. So when conflict is ignored or an investigation is handled poorly, the cost isn't just morale, it's real money too. And the key thing is most of those situations aren't actually that complex if they're dealt with early and by someone who knows what they're doing. They can become complex when they're ignored or mishandled or left to someone who's uncomfortable with conflict, which understandably describes probably most people. Mediation. It's more common than people think, but it's also widely misunderstood. So I'd like to clear up a few of the most common misconceptions. Uh, Mediation isn't therapy, it's not arbitration. And as a mediator, I don't decide who's right or who's wrong, and I don't bang heads together. What I do and what mediation is it provides a structured, confidential environment in which two people, or sometimes more, can talk to each other, they can be heard and actually understood by each other. I help them move from what can be quite entrenched positions to their interests. That's actually establishing what they really need rather than what they say they want. And more often than not, when people feel genuinely heard, their positions start to shift. Okay, so what is mediation? This is intended to give you a sense of how it works in practice. Imagine two senior managers, let's call them Sarah and David. They've worked together for 3 years, and 6 months ago, something happened, uh, such as a decision was made, something was said in a meeting, whatever happened, someone felt undermined. Neither of them is entirely sure what the other thinks about what happened, but what they do know is that since then, every interaction has been strained, communication has broken down, and their teams have started to notice. At this point, the situation hasn't yet become formal. There's been no complaint or grievance raised, but it's heading that way. Now, the employer has an opportunity here, but only if it's aware of the conflict and only if it wants to be proactive and try to find a solution. Mediation at this stage means that Sarah and David take a few hours out of their schedule. It's confidential and it's focused on where they go from here, not apportioning blame for what happened 6 months ago. In the vast majority of cases, and research bears this out, with settlement rates consistently above 80%, it does work. Sarah and David would leave with an agreement that they've both shaped, and with a working relationship, while not necessarily warm, is functional and the business moves on. And crucially, there was no need for formal action or an investigation. No one went off sick and no one resigned. Okay, the other element of my business is investigations, and I currently focus on workplace investigations. So, on the basis of the last 25 years, the things I've learned are put into practice in the following ways. When a formal complaint is made in the workplace, a grievance, an allegation of misconduct, a whistleblowing concern, for example, the organization has a legal and ethical obligation to investigate it properly. That means thoroughly, impartially, and in line with correct procedure. What I'm seeing too often is that the investigation is handed to someone internal, maybe a senior manager, maybe an HR business partner, someone capable and well-intentioned, but who knows the people involved, has opinions about what's happened, has a day job to get on with too, and may have limited or no experience of conducting formal investigations. Now, the result is rarely deliberate failure, but it's often a procedural one. And procedural failures in investigations will be very costly at an employment tribunal. I'll give you an example. A medium-sized business receives a formal complaint from a member of staff alleging that their line manager has been bullying them. For example, repeated criticism in front of colleagues, exclusion from key meetings, undermining behaviour over a period of time. It's a serious matter for the business and it needs investigating. The HR manager investigates. They're sympathetic, diligent, and unfortunately a little bit out of their depth. They've interviewed the complainant, but haven't followed a structured approach. They've spoken to a couple of witnesses, but not taken proper statements. They've drafted a report, but it confuses findings of fact with their recommendations, which is a significant error. By the time an external investigator is brought in, and it's often at that point, things have already started to unravel, and the process largely has to be restarted. The cost, the delay, and the damage to trust are all avoidable. What external investigation brings is independence, structure, and the kind of experience that only comes from having done this properly over a long period. Structured interviews, proper evidence handling, clear, objective findings, and a report that distinguishes what was found from what's recommended with no agenda. There's no prior knowledge or relationship with the parties, and there's no internal politics involved. So, how did I get to where I am now in terms of starting my own business? Well, as I said, I worked as an employee in investigations for 25 years. I'd love to say that starting my business was the culmination of a great plan, but it wasn't. I thought I'd be an employee my whole working life. I was generally happy, but inevitably sometimes frustrated. I think that's a pretty typical experience. Then one day during a particularly stressful, busy period, I just threw my pen down and stopped and decided I wasn't going to do it anymore. It came pretty much out of the blue. I didn't have a plan for what was going to be next, but after a few months of feeling a bit lost, I eventually found my way to where I am now. If I'm honest, I never thought I'd be running my own business, and I certainly had no idea how much there would be to do, but I haven't regretted it for a second. So I'm nearly 11 months in now, and the last 2 months have been quite busy, which has been great. And the signs are good generally, looking ahead, but one step at a time. My business depends on my clients being able to trust me, the quality of my work and my integrity. And I'm finding in both regards, my previous experience is really valuable and speaks for itself. Okay, I want to leave you with a practical thought because I think the most useful thing that can come from this session is perhaps a mental bookmark. Primarily, I work with and through HR consultancies, teams, and business partners who need an independent investigator or mediator they can call on. All business owners and directors, sorry, also business owners and directors who find themselves with a formal complaint and no clear path through it. So when might you think of me? Here are a few triggers. A grievance is mentioned at work. It's either being contemplated by an employee or it's already been submitted. Mediation can be used at any stage, but naturally, the earlier the better. There's an existing internal disciplinary investigation that's starting to get messy, and no one's really sure what they should be doing for the best. Two key people in a team or a business are at loggerheads, and the whole team is starting to suffer. Or finally, a tribunal claim is looming, perhaps after a grievance. Faced with that prospect, trying mediation makes practical and financial sense. It's a standalone process and doesn't prejudice any other action that's ongoing. The picture of what you're faced with or what your client's faced with may be unclear, but an initial conversation with me costs nothing. And I can quickly tell you whether there's something I can help you with. And if not, I'll say so. To close, I'd just like to reiterate really that conflict is completely normal. It's natural. People disagree, they misunderstand each other, they fall out, and they sometimes behave badly. That's not failure, and it's not specific to the workplace. It's just a fact of life. But in the workplace, what happens most is what happens next, whether that conflict is addressed or avoided. In my view, it's very, very often avoided, left to see if it'll sort itself out. Sometimes it does, but it's taking an enormous risk. Very often, things are left to fester rather than being addressed proactively. I set up conflict resolution because I think there's a real value in having someone independent, experienced, and properly qualified when those moments arise, whatever the size or sector the organization operates in. If anything I've said today resonates, either for you, for someone you know, or for a client, I'd welcome a conversation. There's no obligation, and I certainly won't be giving any sales pitch. My details are on the slide, and I'm on LinkedIn. I'm centrally located in Rutland, which is in the East Midlands. Appreciate it's the smallest county, and a lot of people don't know where it is. But I'm sure you all at least knew it wasn't in Denmark, which is what one person said to me one day. I think they were confusing it with Jutland. And I work across the whole of the UK. If anyone's got any questions, I'd be more than happy to try and answer them. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Any questions?
Thanks, John. That's very comprehensive. Do you still see non-disclosure agreements as a way out? Does that pop up still?
To be honest, Mal, it doesn't really come into my world a great deal because I tend to think something that's subject to a non-disclosure agreement has almost by definition been kept within a business. There is a kind of a parallel in terms of the way mediation works, in as much as the whole process is completely confidential. That means that it can act as a completely standalone process. And the beauty of it really is that the people who are in conflict can speak completely freely to me, knowing that they won't be quoted to either to the other party or externally. So, for example, if a grievance has already started, mediation can still take place. The parties can speak openly to each other, and nothing that's said will find its way into evidence in that grievance investigation. And I can't be called to give evidence in any kind of proceedings at all.
Yeah.
Just on the investigation front, all workplace investigations should be completely confidential. Obviously, the lines can be blurred if they're conducted internally, given that the investigator is actually part of the organization. But working externally, that's the basis on which I've worked my whole career. I mean, obviously, I started at HMRC, worked extensively for over 15 years under the Official Secrets Act. So that's just ingrained in what I do. And anything that I hear stays confidential.
Yeah. Can you get over to Iran?
That's interesting. You should raise that. I do kind of smile every time I hear the word mediation mentioned in relation to what's going on over there. To say, I think my idea of mediation is somewhat different from other people's.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks.
I have a question. Great presentation, John. So
Thank you, Sue.
thanks for sharing with us. At what point do you think it's a good time for employers to start engaging with you?
In general terms, and probably not very helpfully, as early as possible. It's tricky because there's always conflict. It's natural and largely it's helpful. The thing I'd probably stress to employers is for it to be on their managers' radars, so that they are actually focusing on the relationship between their team members. And very often they're not, and it's understandable because everybody's very busy. Managers are generally responsible for, it's the bottom line, isn't it, that they're most focused on. But if you turn a blind eye or just duck the issues, and I've been there as a manager as well, it's very tempting to think, oh, this is nothing, or it'll go away. At some point, you need to have a conversation with the people and just, try and establish whether they are going to work things out, whether you can help. Taking advice you can't take advice too early, I suppose. I mean, it won't cost anything, but in terms of when you actually engage a mediator, it's a judgment call. Obviously, the employees have to be open to it. It's a voluntary process.
Mm,
Um, and I think also an awful lot of organizations haven't informed their staff that it is even a thing that they can do if they want to.
mm,
Again, obviously, it's a paid service, so I appreciate you don't want to be offering a service that everybody might say, yes, I'll have some of that, please,
mm.
because they can. But identifying conflict at an early stage and being proactive, whether that means a mediator or not, is really important.
Great, thank you.
Thanks.
Particular place that you get the most of your referrals from? I'm thinking, obviously, you need to be involved in the nitty-gritty of the business to be aware of the conflict, but are you looking for introductions to any particular groups, like business coaches, accountants? Where do you get most of your business from?
Yeah, thanks, Richard. To be honest, in the early days, getting my business off the ground, I've got associate contracts with 4 service providers who provide HR type services or investigation stroke mediation type services. So that has been really useful to get things moving. It's not what I want my business to be long term, but it's generated income. It's given me, especially on the mediation front, that I've not been doing that long. It's given me experience. But I am now starting, thanks very much to one of LMP's members who's referred a client to me in the last couple of weeks, to get my own private engagements as well. That LMP member is a HR consultant, so that probably answers the question most directly. And I think that's the most easily accessible route into what I do, whether that's through an HR consultant and their clients or targeting specific businesses, which I'm looking to do on a local level. Obviously, it's very hard other than getting your presence known on LinkedIn, etc. Primarily through the HR world.
Fine.
John, because your expertise is quite niche, is it likely that HR departments try and sort the issues out themselves and cause more damage?
Yeah, very, very likely. Yeah, yeah. I've got a stepdaughter who's an HR director, and we compare notes as much as we can, not betraying anybody's confidence. And yeah, it's quite staggering some of the things you hear, and I get it, and I sympathise because virtually everywhere it's this kind of thing is seen as an add-on. It's not fundamental to any business, whether that's well, I'd say that's the wrong approach because clearly your people are your greatest asset. So it's very tempting. I mean, if we can do something internally, why do we need to spend money on an external person? It's as basic as that. Everybody could have a go at an investigation. We all know what an investigation is, kind of, and we've all seen detective things on TV, so it's all a bit interesting and intriguing, but it's very process driven and it needs to be. And ACAS provide great guidelines on how to do an investigation, but they're just not followed. And employment tribunals will absolutely hammer organizations that don't follow those guidelines. I won't bore you with an example, but Pilkington Glass in the last couple of weeks have made a real mess of an internal investigation. It's worth looking up just to see the kind of things that can happen and do happen regularly.
Thank you.